They thought she didn't belong the moment she walked in, but no one realized they were about to witness the most expensive mistake of their careers. The glass doors whispered shut behind Evelyn Carter as she stepped into the lobby, her worn sneakers barely making a sound against the polished marble floors. Sunlight poured through towering windows, catching on crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed columns that seemed to glow with quiet arrogance. This was the kind of place where a single night cost more than most people's monthly rent, and everyone inside knew it. Evelyn paused for half a second, her eyes moving slowly across the room, not with awe, not with hesitation, but with a strange familiarity, as if she had seen it all before, every detail, every corner, every reflection, and yet to everyone else, she was invisible in the worst possible way. A man in a tailored navy suit at the reception desk noticed her first, his smile fading just slightly as his gaze dropped to her jacket. Faded at the sleeves, her jeans worn at the knees. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't have to. The look was enough. Nearby guests exchanged glances, subtle, quick, practiced, the kind of judgment that traveled faster than words. A woman holding a designer handbag leaned closer to her companion and whispered something behind a polite smile. And somewhere in the distance, a quiet chuckle slipped into the air. Evelyn stepped forward calmly, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. She approached the desk as if she had every right to be there, which only made it worse in their eyes. The man straightened, placing both hands neatly on the counter, his tone polished but edged with something colder underneath. "Ma'am, can I help you?" he asked. Though the question carried an unspoken assumption, Evelyn met his eyes briefly, her voice soft but clear. "I have a reservation," she said, and for a moment, just a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a polite disbelief. "Of course," he replied, already reaching for the keyboard, his fingers hovering as if expecting her to correct herself, as if waiting for the inevitable backtrack, the admission that she was mistaken, that she meant somewhere else. Evelyn didn't move, didn't explain, didn't rush. She simply stood there, calm, patient, as if time itself was on her side. Behind her, the lobby continued its quiet performance of wealth and status, heels clicking softly, glasses clinking in distant conversation. But beneath it all, something had shifted, something subtle, something no one could quite name yet. And as the man at the desk began typing her name with a faint smirk forming at the corner of his mouth, he had no idea that in just a few seconds, everything he thought he understood about this moment was about to collapse into silence. The keyboard click slowed, then stopped completely as Daniel Brooks stared at the screen, his faint smirk tightening into something more rigid. His eyes flicked once toward Evelyn and then back to the monitor as if it might correct itself. But it did not. The name was there exactly as she said it, clear, undeniable, and attached to a reservation that did not just exist, but carried a note that made his posture shift almost imperceptibly. He cleared his throat, forcing a polite tone back into place. "May I see your identification?" he asked, this time more carefully, as though the question itself might restore control. Evelyn did not argue. She reached into her jacket and placed a simple card on the marble counter. No designer logo, no gold trim, just a clean white surface with her name printed in understated lettering. Daniel picked it up between two fingers, his brows pulling together slightly. Something about it did not match what he expected, and yet the system in front of him did not lie. Behind Evelyn, the quiet whispers began to shift, curiosity replacing amusement. The woman with the designer handbag leaned forward just a little more, her smile fading as she tried to read the situation. Daniel typed again, slower now, double-checking each detail as if searching for an error that would return things to normal. But instead of correcting, the screen only confirmed what he was beginning to fear. His voice dropped a fraction. "One moment, please," he said, no longer dismissive, no longer certain. He turned slightly, signaling to a colleague nearby, a younger employee who stepped closer with a cautious expression. Daniel leaned in, speaking in a low voice that did not carry, but the tension did. It spread quietly across the lobby, like a ripple no one could ignore. Evelyn remained still, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her gaze steady, not defiant, not nervous, just patient, as if she had seen this exact moment unfold before. as if she knew exactly how it would end. Seconds passed, but they felt longer, heavier, the kind of silence that made people aware of themselves, of where they stood, of what they had assumed just moments ago. Daniel straightened again, his movements now precise, controlled, but no longer confident. "Miss Carter," he began, carefully, testing the name as though it carried weight he had not recognized before. "There appears to be a special note attached to your reservation." He hesitated, the word special catching in his throat. And for the first time, the balance in the room tilted, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that the laughter was gone, enough that the glances had changed, enough that something unspoken had begun to settle in. And as Daniel reached for the phone beside the desk, his hand paused for just a fraction of a second before dialing, because somewhere deep down, he was starting to understand that this was no longer a routine check-in, and whatever came next would not be something he could control. The phone rang once, then twice, each tone cutting through the quiet like a metronome measuring Daniel Brooks's growing unease. His eyes remained fixed on the desk, as if avoiding Evelyn Carter might somehow delay whatever was coming next. "Front desk," he said finally, his voice lower now, controlled but no longer confident. There was a pause, then a shift in his posture so subtle most would have missed it. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted slightly, and the color in his face changed, just enough to betray the moment. "Yes, she is here," he continued, and this time, the words carried weight, not dismissal, not skepticism, but recognition. A longer pause followed, and whatever he heard on the other end seemed to pull the ground out from under him piece by piece. Behind him, the younger employee leaned closer, trying to read his expression, but Daniel's face had gone carefully neutral, the kind of expression people wear when they realize they have made a mistake they cannot undo. He nodded once, slowly, even though the person on the other end could not see him. "Understood," he said, and when he placed the receiver back into its cradle, the sound echoed, louder than it should have, like a final note that marked the end of something unseen. The lobby felt different now, not louder, not quieter, just heavier, as if the air itself had thickened. Daniel turned back to Evelyn. But this time, he did not look past her, he did not glance at her shoes or her jacket. He looked directly at her, properly, for the first time, and in that moment, something in his expression shifted from control to caution. "Miss Carter," he said again, but now the name was careful, deliberate, almost rehearsed. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." The words came out smoother than he felt, but they hung in the air, fragile, incomplete, because neither of them believed that was what this was. Evelyn said nothing, her silence steady, unhurried, giving him nothing to hold on to. And that made it worse, because now he had to fill the space himself. "Our general manager is on the way down to personally assist you," he added, choosing each word with precision. And as soon as he said it, the ripple spread through the room. The woman with the designer handbag straightened, her earlier confidence fading into curiosity. A man near the elevators paused mid-step, his attention shifting fully toward the desk, because in a place like this, a general manager did not come down for just anyone, not for routine check-ins, not for mistakes, only for something important, something significant. And suddenly, every assumption made just minutes ago began to crack. Daniel stepped slightly to the side, a small gesture, but one that carried meaning, creating space where there had been none, offering respect where there had been doubt, and yet it still was not enough, because the realization had already begun to settle in, slow and heavy, and as the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened with a soft chime, every eye turned instinctively, drawn by something they could not yet explain, because whatever was about to happen next would not just correct a misunderstanding, it would redefine it entirely. The elevator doors parted with a soft, controlled glide, and the man who stepped out did not rush, he did not hesitate. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. A tailored charcoal suit, a silver tie perfectly aligned, every detail deliberate, every step measured against the polished marble beneath him. Conversations in the lobby faded without being told, not because of noise, but because of presence. Daniel Brooks felt it immediately, the shift he could no longer ignore. His spine straightened instinctively, his hands clasping tighter at his sides as the man approached, each step closing the distance not just physically, But socially, hierarchically, undeniably, the younger employee beside him took half a step back without realizing it. And even the guests who had been watching now adjusted their posture, as if they suddenly understood they were witnessing something far more important than they had assumed. The man stopped a few feet from the desk, his gaze moving past Daniel without pause, without acknowledgement, landing directly on Evelyn Carter. And in that instant, everything became clear. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough, a subtle softening, a respect that was not performed, not exaggerated, but real. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm, steady, and unmistakably deferential, and the room went still, not a forced silence, but a natural one, like the moment before a realization fully settles in. Daniel felt his breath catch, just slightly, because that tone, that level of respect, was not something given lightly, not in a place like this, not to someone he had dismissed minutes ago. The man stepped forward, extending his hand. "I apologize for the delay. We have been expecting you," he continued, and the words landed with precision, each one dismantling the assumptions that had filled the room moments before. Evelyn met his gaze, her expression unchanged, calm, composed, as if this moment had always been inevitable. She shook his hand briefly, no more, no less. And in that simple gesture, the balance shifted completely. Daniel's mind raced, replaying every word he had said, every glance, every assumption, each one now carrying a weight he could not ignore behind him. The whispers had vanished entirely, replaced by a silence so complete it felt deliberate, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The man turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge Daniel without truly facing him. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, the question simple, but the tone carried something sharper beneath it. Not anger, not accusation, but expectation, and that was worse. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. The words he had used earlier no longer fit, no longer worked. "No, sir," he managed finally, his voice quieter than before, stripped of its earlier confidence, because now he understood, not fully, not yet, but enough to know that whatever he had thought this situation was, he had been wrong. And as the man gestured subtly toward the private lounge beyond the lobby, inviting Evelyn to follow, every eye in the room remained fixed on her, not because of what she wore, but because of what she now represented. And in that moment, the truth settled in, slow and undeniable. She had never been out of place. They had simply failed to recognize where she truly stood. The shift did not end when she stepped forward. It deepened, settled, and quietly rewrote the entire room. As Evelyn Carter walked beside the general manager toward the private lounge, her pace unhurried, her posture unchanged, as if nothing about the last few minutes had surprised her. The doors to the lounge opened smoothly, revealing a space even more refined, softer lighting, quieter tones, a place reserved for those who did not need to ask for access. And yet before she crossed the threshold, she stopped, just slightly, not enough to draw attention immediately, but enough to pause the man beside her. He turned, waiting, attentive, and in that moment, she shifted her gaze back toward the front desk, toward Daniel Brooks, who had not moved from where he stood, his hands now resting stiffly against the counter. His expression caught somewhere between realization and regret. The distance between them was no more than 30 feet, but it felt much greater now, measured not in space, but in understanding. Evelyn held his gaze for a second longer than expected, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation. And then she spoke, her voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to reach him without effort. "It is interesting," she said, "how quickly people decide where someone belongs." The words landed softly, but their weight was unmistakable. No one in the lobby moved, no one interrupted, because the silence now belonged to her. Daniel swallowed. The response he might have offered earlier no longer existed, because anything he said would only confirm what had already been revealed. Evelyn continued, not raising her voice, not changing her tone. "I have walked into places like this my entire life," she added, "and every time, the same assumption is made before a single word is spoken." The general manager remained still beside her, his expression respectful, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. because even he understood this was no longer about service. This was about something deeper, something the entire room was now witnessing. Evelyn let the silence linger for a beat, just long enough for the meaning to settle in, and then she finished. The difference today is that this time, you will remember it. Daniel felt the words land, not as an attack, but as a truth he could not step away from. His shoulders lowered slightly, the confidence that had once defined his posture replaced by something quieter, something more aware, and for the first time, he nodded, not to assert control, but to acknowledge it had never been his to begin with. Evelyn turned back toward the lounge, the moment complete, not because it had been forced, but because it had been understood, and as she walked through the doors, disappearing into the space beyond, the lobby remained still for a second longer, as if the room itself needed time to adjust, because what had just happened was not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, and in that silence, everyone present carried the same realization. Some lessons do not arrive with noise, they arrive with clarity, and once seen, they cannot be unseen. Inside the private lounge, the air felt different, quieter, insulated from the weight that still lingered outside. The door closed softly behind Evelyn Carter, and for a brief moment, the world beyond that threshold seemed to fade. The general manager gestured toward a seating area near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, sunlight stretching across polished wood and soft leather chairs. "Please, make yourself comfortable," he said, his tone measured, respectful, but there was something else beneath it now, something closer to caution. Evelyn did not sit immediately. Her gaze moved across the room once, slow, observant, taking in every detail not as a guest, but as someone evaluating, remembering, deciding, and then she turned back to him. "How long have you been in this position?" she asked, her voice calm, almost conversational. The question caught him slightly off guard, but he answered without hesitation. 3 years, he replied, straightening just a fraction. As if aware that every word now mattered more than before, Evelyn nodded once, thoughtful, as if placing that detail somewhere in a larger picture only she could see. "And in those 3 years," she continued, "how many people have walked through that lobby and been judged before they were spoken to?" The question did not accuse, it did not demand, but it did not need to, because the answer was already understood. The general manager paused, not searching for a response, but choosing whether to speak honestly. "More than there should have been," he said finally, his voice lower now, more grounded. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment, and then, just slightly, she nodded again, not in approval, not in dismissal, but in acknowledgement, as if that honesty, however late, still carried value. She moved then, finally taking a seat, her posture relaxed but never careless, the kind of presence that did not need to assert itself to be felt. Outside the lounge, the lobby had begun to move again, but not the same way. Conversations resumed, footsteps returned, but the rhythm had changed, quieter, more aware. Daniel Brooks remained at the desk, his hands now resting flat against the marble, his eyes fixed not on the screen, but on the reflection in front of him, replaying the moment not as it happened, but as it should have. The younger employee beside him shifted slightly, uncertain, as if waiting for something to be said. But Daniel said nothing, because for the first time, he understood that silence could carry more weight than any explanation. Back inside, the general manager took a careful breath. "Ms. Carter," he began, more deliberate now, "there are certain details regarding your visit that I believe we should discuss privately." Evelyn looked at him, steady, composed, and for a second, there was something in her expression that suggested this was the moment everything would finally be said, everything clarified, everything revealed. But instead, she leaned back slightly, her hands resting loosely in her lap, and replied, "Yes," her voice even, unhurried. "I believe we should." And in that quiet agreement, something larger than a simple meeting began to take shape, something that would not stay contained within this room for long. The room held its breath in a way that felt almost intentional, as if even the quiet hum of the city beyond the glass had softened to listen. The general manager remained standing for a moment longer before finally taking a seat across from Evelyn Carter, his posture straight, attentive, every movement measured. "Miss Carter," he began again, slower this time, choosing each word with care. There are protocols we follow when certain individuals arrive, and your visit today falls into that category. He paused briefly, watching her expression, but it did not change, not even slightly. She simply waited, allowing him to continue. We were notified in advance, he added. But clearly, not everyone understood the significance of that notification. The admission hung between them, not defensive, not apologetic, just honest. Evelyn tilted her head just slightly, her gaze steady. No, she said quietly. They did not. And the simplicity of her response carried more weight than any accusation could have. Outside the lounge, Daniel Brooks finally moved, not because he had been told to, but because standing still had become unbearable. He stepped away from the desk, walking slowly toward the far end of the lobby where the reflection of the glass showed him clearly. His shoulders no longer squared with authority, but lowered with awareness. The younger employee watched him go, unsure whether to follow, unsure whether anything should be said at all, because the atmosphere had changed in a way no training manual could prepare for. Back inside, the general manager leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. You have not been here in person before, he said, more as a statement than a question. Evelyn nodded once. No, she replied, her tone even. I have always preferred to observe from a distance. The words settled carefully, revealing just enough, but not everything. And that was when it began to connect, not fully, not yet, but enough to shift understanding into something deeper. The general manager's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion, but in realization. Then today is not just a visit, he said slowly. It is a decision. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to confirm what he already knew, and then she spoke, her voice calm, unwavering. Every place reveals itself eventually, she said. Not when it is being watched, but when it believes no one important is looking. The words landed with precision, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. And in that moment, the purpose of her presence began to take shape, not as a simple guest, not as a routine arrival, but as something far more significant, something that had been unfolding long before she walked through those doors, something that would not end when she left. And as the general manager leaned back slightly, absorbing what had just been said, he understood that whatever happened next would not be about correcting a mistake. It would be about defining what came after it. The realization did not arrive like a shock. It settled slowly, deliberately, as if the truth itself preferred precision over drama. The general manager remained still for a moment, his gaze fixed on Evelyn Carter, no longer trying to understand who she was, but beginning to understand what she represented. Then today, he said carefully, is about more than observation. His voice carried a quiet weight now, the kind that comes when assumptions are replaced by clarity. Evelyn did not respond. Immediately, she let the silence stretch, not to create tension, but to allow the meaning to land fully. And then she spoke, her tone even, unwavering. Every system reveals its values under pressure, she said. But the real measure is what it does when it believes no one is watching. Outside the lounge, the lobby had not returned to normal. It had only resumed movement without regaining its certainty. Daniel Brooks stood near the edge of the marble floor, no longer behind the desk, no longer shielded by position, watching the closed doors with a focus that bordered on stillness, each passing second stretching longer than the last, because now he understood that what was happening inside that room would not stay contained there. It would reach him, eventually, back inside. The general manager exhaled slowly, as if preparing to step into something irreversible. There are policies in place, he began, standards that are meant to ensure consistency. He paused, choosing his next words with care. But clearly, consistency without awareness becomes something else entirely. Evelyn nodded once, acknowledging the statement without validating it. Policies do not fail, she replied quietly. People decide how to apply them. The distinction was subtle, but it shifted responsibility in a way that could not be ignored. The general manager felt it immediately, not as criticism, but as a reframing he could not dismiss. He leaned forward slightly, his tone now more direct, more grounded. Then you already know what this means, he said, not asking, but confirming. Evelyn met his gaze, steady, composed. Yes, she answered, and for the first time, there was the faintest trace of something beneath her calm, not emotion, but finality. I do. The words did not need explanation, because the implications had already begun to unfold. Outside, a subtle shift moved through the staff. Conversations were shorter, movements more deliberate, as if an unseen line had been drawn and everyone could feel it, even without understanding it. Daniel's reflection in the glass showed a man who no longer recognized the position he had relied on just minutes before. His authority had not been taken. It had simply been exposed, and that made it impossible to reclaim in the same way. Inside the lounge, the general manager sat back slightly, absorbing the moment, not resisting it, not avoiding it, because he understood now that this was not about defending what had happened. It was about deciding what would follow. And as Evelyn remained still, composed, unwavering in her presence, the final shape of the moment became clear. This was not a correction. It was a turning point, and once it passed, nothing in that building would remain exactly as it had been before. The silence did not break when the conversation ended. It transformed, settling into something more permanent, something that lingered even as Evelyn Carter rose from her seat with the same calm precision she had carried from the moment she arrived. The general manager stood immediately, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, the kind that no longer needed explanation. "We will make the necessary changes," he said, his voice steady, but now grounded in something deeper than professionalism. Evelyn regarded him for a moment, her expression unchanged, yet there was a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes, not approval, not forgiveness, but understanding. "Change is not announced," she replied. "It is demonstrated." The words were simple, but they carried a finality that left no room for interpretation. He nodded once, slowly, because he understood that whatever came next would not be measured by promises, but by actions that could not be undone or hidden. She turned then, walking toward the door without hesitation, and as it opened once more, the lobby beyond seemed to pause again, not because it had been told to, but because something in the air had shifted permanently. Conversations faded, footsteps slowed, and every pair of eyes followed her as she stepped back onto the marble floor, not as a question, but as an answer. Daniel Brooks stood where he had been, but he was no longer the same man who had first looked at her. His posture had changed, not forced, not rehearsed, but real, as if something inside him had been quietly rearranged. He met her gaze when she approached, not with confidence, not with defense, but with a clarity that had not existed before, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove, only something to recognize. Evelyn stopped just short of the desk, her presence steady, and then she inclined her head slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, but it was not, because it carried meaning now, not as validation, but as closure. Daniel nodded in return, not out of habit, but because it was the only response that made sense. The room remained still as she continued past him, moving toward the exit with the same quiet certainty she had entered with. But everything around her had changed. The glances that once judged now observed, the silence that once excluded now respected, and as the glass doors opened once more, sunlight spilling across the floor, she stepped through without looking back, because she did not need to. The lesson had already taken hold, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely, and as the doors closed behind her, the lobby did not return to what it had been. It could not, because once people see the cost of their assumptions, they carry that awareness forward, whether they choose to act on it or not. And in that quiet aftermath, one truth remained, not spoken, not written, but understood by everyone who had witnessed it. Respect is not something given based on appearance. It is revealed through how you treat those you believe have nothing to offer. And that day, the room learned exactly what that meant.